Hey everyone, welcome back to Flutter Atlanta. Thank you to everybody tuning in online. I just want to remind everyone before we get started, we're using the microphones in the ceiling so they can pick up anything you say, so don't say anything you'd regret, and try not to make too much noise in the corner while you eat your food. But yep, my name is Emmett Dean. I'm a manager of engineering here at Black Airplane. I have a background in native and Android and iOS development, and I've been using Flutter for a little over 4 years now. I've built over 20 different Flutter apps in that time period, have several more in progress, and I love it so much that I typically use it for my own personal projects. I want to give a quick shout out to Black Airplane, which is where we're at. I want to thank them for the food and the beer and letting us use this awesome space to have this meetup. And I just want to give them a shout out of, we have a very special team here that can produce top quality work and can build pretty much anything these days. So if you need custom software, talk to Brandon. He would love to work with you. Today we're going to be talking about using Dart for your backend. So like many of my last talks, let's imagine you're starting out a brand new project and you're making some decisions on what you want your tech stack to be. There's so many options these days. You're seeing YouTube videos left and right. What should you use? Blah, 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 blah. If you're here, you've probably already decided you want to use Flutter for your front end. So we can go ahead and take that as a given. But what should you use for your backend? There's tons of different options, tons of different languages you can learn. Maybe you're familiar with some, maybe you're not, and there's always new ones coming out all the time. But you're just a frustrated developer and wish that you didn't have to learn a whole nother language just to build this project that you want. That's probably what sent you down this initial rabbit hole, and it's what sent me down this rabbit hole. And enter Dartfrog. So Dartfrog is a minimalistic backend framework for Dart built by a company called Very Good Ventures. Very Good Ventures is a Flutter development agency, and they contribute a lot to the open source community. So I highly recommend checking them out and their other open source projects because they go pretty deep and they contribute to things like popular block packages. They have one of the most popular linting styles, and the list goes on and on. But Dartfrog is fast, lightweight, and simple out of the box. It's built for speed, and you can use pretty much everything that Dart can. So all of your packages that are Dart specific, not Flutter specific, you can go ahead and pull them into this, and it's very, very familiar. This is going to give you a lot of different advantages if you are building out a team to maintain a platform, because now you can just use developers that are familiar with Dart versus having to find a separate back-end team and a front-end team. So I'm trying to compare this to when we started doing cross-platform app development. We used to have an Android team, an iOS team, a web team, and a backend team. Flutter first took out Android and iOS, so you could build both of those apps off of one code base. Then they released web support, including also desktop support. So now you're down to Android, iOS, and web, all with Flutter. So this is kind of like almost the final frontier. They're like, how can we make Flutter work for backend? It is a little bit scary if you followed the JavaScript world. JavaScript developers love JavaScript so much, they found a way to build for every platform with JavaScript. But I will say, I think this execution has learned a lot from that, and I do think that this is a little bit better and more promising than some of the things that JavaScript has built over the years just to make sure they can use JavaScript for those platforms. So it has all the basics you need right out of the box. This is an open source project you can contribute to, and it is still fairly early on. But it has basic things you need, just like simple routing and dynamic routing. You can have middlewares set up to make sure they can't access certain routes or to do some dependency injection. It can, of course, be testable. You can use it to serve static files if you just need some simple files served for your API. It has support for different environments. And also you can easily deploy this to pretty much your favorite cloud providers. So they have guides for Google Cloud, AWS, and DigitalOcean. On their feature set right now is also just a command line argument to say Dartfrog deploy, and it'll automatically deploy to Google Cloud Run for you. That being said, this does have its own command line tool, VS Code extension, and awesome documentation to make it easy to get up and running. So the tooling is already there. That's always been something Very Good Ventures has been excellent at, is kind of providing that over-the-top tooling. But Dartfrog comes with one more really big trick up its sleeve that you're not going to get from any other options, and that is being able to share code between your front end and back end via packages. So this, to me, is what's most intriguing and is can save you a lot of time. So typically you have your back-end team and your front-end team working in isolation. Maybe you have a JSON API that you're going to interact with. And then on the front end, that team's going to have to build out models as we do with our JSON serializable and freeze packages. And then any changes are going to happen asynchronously, and that could cause the app to break. With this, we can actually create a separate package. In this case, it's just Coffee API resources. And I can put all of those model classes that the API and the front end are going to use in one singular package and import them to both. And now they can both depend on that package. That's going to allow you to do some really interesting things with your deployment system, your continuous integration and deployment system, to make sure that things are getting deployed at the right times and they can rely on the most up-to-date version. This is really exciting. It saves you a lot of time, and it also makes it really clean to work between your front end and back end. Also, this is what you can do today, just using JSON serializable in a separate package. They have on their roadmap Dart API client generation. So I believe they're working towards being able to generate these models for you. So what you're returning out of these responses, it'll just go ahead and generate a client package for you to import, and it'll give you all the nice services and classes without you having to write them yourself. In addition to that, they also have some things on the roadmap like API documentation. If you used a Python fast API before, that'll automatically generate some basic API documentation based on the endpoints themselves. So Very Good Ventures is doing a great job really moving in the right direction and trying to take as much workload off of you as possible and generate a lot of really nice to haves. So with that being said, let's take a look at a code sample. So you guys will probably recognize this from last month. So last month our talk was on top Flutter packages, and I built an app that basically just showed you popular coffee drinks, right? You could click into them, see the ingredients, see a little description, favorite them if you wanted to. Just a simple demo app to show off some of the packages. With this month, I decided to build on top of that. Beforehand, we had a API that was a Node.js API that just served this very simple JSON. So all I did was take that project from last month and we reworked the API with Dartfrog. The first thing that I want to point out is this Coffee API resources. This is that package that I abstracted. This is the simplest it could possibly get because I'm only sharing one class between the front end and the back end, and that is my coffee model, which is basically this class that's going to hold the title, the description, the ingredients, and the image. So heading into the API, it's set up in a way kind of similar to another framework I used called SvelteKit. I don't know if anyone's ever worked with SvelteKit before. It's another modern JS framework. But they do something that is, people either love it or they hate it. So, and that's their routing system and their naming convention. So the routing system, the index, of course, will just refer to your slash. So if I went to localhost / it'll refer to this index.dart file. And then the routing convention actually goes off the folders. So I can have a coffee folder, which would be /coffee, and then the index would just be /coffee. Or you can do dynamic routing with these parameters as the name of the file. So as you can see here, you have coffee ID, and then this will actually come into your function here as a parameter called coffee ID and allow you to handle it there. So this kind of using the file naming to determine the routing is great because it's very obvious what is happening here. The worst part about it though, and what most people complain about, is when I go to quickly jump between files because I'm in the zone and I type index.dart and I have 3 different files that pop up. That can get a little bit frustrating, but other than that, it makes the code pretty organized and clear to interact with. So as you can see, these endpoints are very simple. One function on request. You can access all types of things like headers and the data that's being sent to this endpoint, and if it was a GET request or post to GET, all through this request context. And then you pretty much are going to do whatever you need to do for your API and then return it. So in this case, I also have a lib folder here, which has data sources, which we have a coffee data source, and then our persistence, which is basically a SQL client. So instead of just going off of a raw JSON file like I did last month, I've put all of this in a local running SQL database, and we're able to access that through the normal MySQL client Dart package. So there's no special package that needed to be used for this that BGB had to maintain. You can just use a normal raw Dart package, which is a huge advantage because you're getting access to an already really large ecosystem of packages to use. For this data source, it's fairly simple. I have a function to get all, so basically just list out all of the coffee I have in my, my database. And then I also added one just to show the dynamic routing of being able to get a coffee drink of a specific ID. So as you can see, this coffee object is being imported from that shared package between the app and the backend. So this file lives in that completely separate package and is shared. So if that got updated, you would be forced to update both the backend and the front end simultaneously to make sure everything continues running. So let's look at, let's actually get this running real quick. So it's very easy to get this running because they have their own CLI tool again. So they have a whole set of commands, Dartfrog build, Dartfrog dev in this case. And as we love as Flutter developers, it also has hot reload. So when you run dartfrog.dev, it will, go into the API folder. As you run dartfrog.dev, it will go ahead and spin that up on our localhost port here, and it will have hot reload. So I could change anything in these files. As soon as they save, it'll automatically refresh for you, which is great. That's something that we've just become accustomed to now as Flutter developers. I already have this app running over here. As you can see, I didn't have the API running before, so it's showing us a little error here. If I give this a refresh, it should now load in all of our different beautiful coffee drinks and their images. So you can hop into these just like you could before, see their ingredients, a description, add to favorites, everything like that. So this is a very simple JSON API. Again, just to demonstrate accessing this through browser, you can do /coffee to get a JSON dump of all of the coffee that we have in there, or with that dynamic routing, you can give it an ID of like 1 just to get the first drink. So this is really interesting, right? Because now we've built a really simple API that's pretty capable, all with the Dart language all the way through to the front end of our app. So even though this is really new, it's very capable, and it's something that could save you a lot of time. And I think it's really interesting if we hop over real quick to the Dartfrog documentation and look at their roadmap. This is something that Very Good Ventures is actively investing time in. You can see it by how frequent their updates are and kind of the progress that they've made on this roadmap. So some things that we called out earlier, this Dart API client generation, so being able to generate this package for you to automatically interact with your backend. The Open API documentation automatically generated off these endpoints that you're creating. And then, of course, improving their testing library, things like that. And also that deploy command that we talked about, being able to automatically deploy to Cloud Run. So to me, when I'm looking at this, I don't think you are at a point yet where you're going to convince enterprise clients to build their main API on Dartfrog. I don't think that's what it's for. It may get there one day, but really why this is interesting is a lot of us use things like Firebase for our backend, right? And we might have a couple of cloud functions that we spin up using Node.js or TypeScript, and this could be a really interesting use case to replace that. Because now you can keep everything in the same language, so if you have to pull in some just Flutter developers, and then you're still going to be deploying on the same infrastructure, essentially, which is going to be Google Cloud Run. Something that I would really like to see come out of this in the future is the Firestore triggers that we have for things like Cloud Functions. So Firestore gives you this huge advantage of if a document changes in Firestore or if somebody uploads something to Firebase storage to automatically trigger those Cloud Functions off of it. Once Dartfrog starts to get a system for basically those Cloud Function triggers or a Firebase admin SDK, I think this could become really powerful, especially for side projects, hackathons, or just smaller projects that don't have a huge need for a crazy large backend. So yeah, I guess I would love to hear any guys of your questions on Dartfrog or what your initial thoughts are after seeing this as Flutter developers. Yeah.
So I was curious about, in a web environment, front end to back end sort of get deployed at the same time.
Yep.
Whereas in a mobile environment, a package updating on the client side could be more delayed or staged, right? And out of your control in some ways. Yep. So how do they handle package versioning when you're sharing between and.
Yeah, so the typical, I think there's two options that we can talk about here. The typical way you would normally do it with a normal API is going to be best with basically a system of semantic versioning. So if you haven't looked into this before.
Sure, I was just curious if there was anything sort of in Dart Frog, that, some boilerplate or just.
No, so not to actually do like a code push, but as we were talking about earlier, there is a project that could support that. That is called Shorebird. So something that the React Native people have held over Flutter for the longest time is we have code push. There's always been some debate on whether that actually adheres to Apple terms of service, but either way now we're about to have a service that offers it. This is the idea that you could, without going through Apple App Review or Google's App Review, push a change. So I would look into this if you really want to couple those, so you could basically deploy a Shorebird code push and deploy your API at the same time, and it would be live. But other than that, you should implement some sort of semantic versioning system to basically say,
on the API.
Yeah, we'll access that version. Yep.
And the Dart Frog routing system would support that really well.
Yeah, definitely.
It would definitely support having the different versions there.
Yeah.
If there's different versions of packages, that might be a little harder, but
yes.
But you can definitely make your stuff work that way.
Yeah.
I see the case for APIs with this. I mean, can this be used to dynamically serve pages or?
I haven't looked into that at all. I think they may have talked about that somewhere in their advanced. They do have serving static files. So if you wanted to build some system to go ahead and statically generate those files, you could use this API to serve those files. Now, whether or not you're talking about dynamically rendering certain pages, I'm sure it's possible. It might not be the best solution for that. So that's really what you're going to run into.
Yeah, I don't see any templating.
Yeah. But I do wonder, because obviously your mind wanders, and Flutter has struggled so much in SEO and have gotten so much negative backlash from not having good SEO on web. I do wonder if this is the very first attempt or the backbones of what could eventually be some sort of Flutter server-side rendering system. It has a long way to go before it gets there, but stuff like that does give you a little bit more hope that one day it could be possible.
Yeah, about that though, we were talking a little bit before we started filming, but FlutterCon, if you go look at the videos for FlutterCon, they're out now. Mark Thompson did a talk with Angular and talking about how you can use Angular to kind of set stuff up which would have all the right SEO. And then you have the elements, the actual Flutter elements to do the Flutter parts.
Yep.
And that's a possible solution. I mean, I don't think it's there yet, but that's something possible.
Yep, definitely. Does anyone else have any other questions or thoughts on Dart Frog? Out of curiosity, do you think you would use this in your own project or a side project?
I really like the idea of sharing data classes.
Yep.
It's really, really nice.
They also have a Dart functions.
What do you mean?
They have a system. Let's see if I can Google it. Dart function, like you can deploy cloud function in Dart.
Yeah, I do think there is. I'm sure this is what that's deploying to kind of on the Google Cloud Run side. But Google Cloud Run can run anything that you can Dockerize. So this is a Dart runtime environment running this. There's no, from what I can tell, any weird compiling to JavaScript and trying to run on top of a node server. I don't think it's doing anything like that. It really is just a Dockerized Dart container that's running this.
I don't know much about Dart, but can you combine it with React and something?
Yeah, so we have a lot of projects here at Black Airplane that will use React for like a web front end, especially if SEO is important. And then Flutter would typically be our mobile app solution. So we've had some team members that have built React Native apps. As a whole, Black Airplane hasn't had much success with React Native, and we have had good success with Flutter. I think there's a higher margin of error with React Native than there is Flutter. Flutter kind of will support you a little bit more.
Randall was putting some stuff in the chat as well.
Dart FM
Hey,
is
Randall.
supported by Google.
It's Danielle. Hello.
What did you say?
Dart FN is supported by Google itself.
Dart and
FN, like function. FN.
yes, yeah. Jasper has client rendered, server side render, and bridge.
Yeah, Randall, I brought up Jasper.
I actually have seen Jasper. The issue that I had is this truly is a Dart web framework, right? So you're no longer building a Flutter app. It's almost like an alternative to Flutter for the web, right? It's not Flutter web anymore from what I saw here. So I haven't worked with it very much. I've only read about it, but
And
I
it's
would be
also
worried. I would be worried that there would be pretty significant code changes between a mobile app that you want to run on Android and iOS. That obviously ports very well to web, but with Jasper, I'd be worried that there'd be a significant code change to use this. But I'll have to look into it more. Maybe we'll end up doing a talk on it as well. This seems more focused towards, like you said, the server-side rendering, client rendered, and bridge versus just an API. Dartfrog seems very well positioned for purely writing simple APIs to consume private Flutter apps.
Just out of curiosity, how popular is Flutter?
Flutter is very popular. I guess we can. So this isn't probably the foolproof way to do this, but the easiest way to do it. So a way to judge popularity is based on stars on GitHub. Stars are just like developers favorited this. So Flutter has 157,000 stars. Just to judge that against some other things, if we go React Native, because of course I love to do this, show that we're more popular than React Native. React Native has 112,000 stars, and then we can, you said you work with React as well, so we can just pull that up, I think. Is React not open source on GitHub? Maybe not. Might just be React Native. But yeah, judging by React Native, we've passed them in stars at this point. Another good example is going to the showcase. Is it flutter.dev?
Yeah.
They should probably buy this domain, huh?
Well, they sell the .dev domain, so
Yeah, that's true.
That's their thing.
But you have some really big apps now. BMW, Google Pay, obviously it's a Google technology. They're investing heavily in it. And well, go ahead.
They just announced Google Earth.
Yes, Google
Google
Earth
Earth
just
is
got rebuilt with Flutter, which was really exciting. But there's pretty large investment from the Google team and rebuilding existing Google apps with Flutter, which is, it shows a lot of promise for the longevity of the framework. You see Google Classroom, some 10-cent apps, and eBay, BMW, Google Pay. The list goes on and on nowadays. And there's probably a lot of them that obviously aren't listed on Showcase that are still pretty big names.
And some of these names that aren't Google are also contributing. So like the golden test framework I use is by eBay.
And then I think it was Microsoft contributed a good bit to the folding phone
Yes.
system, which we haven't had to deal with much yet, but that'll be an interesting challenge as folding phones become more popular. Does anyone else have any more questions on Dartfrog?
How would you compare Frog with ServerPod? Are you familiar with ServerPod?
Comparing Dartfrog to RiverPod?
No, ServerPod, which is another framework.
I'm not familiar with ServerPod. Is it okay?
Another, basically a backend framework for Dart.
Are you using this on one of your projects?
I'm just tinkering with it right now.
Interesting.
Randall brought that up in the chat as well.
If there's enough interest in these, I'd be happy to do some sort of comparison talk. See which one you should use for which. There's only one other thing that I'd like to share today, and it's not Flutter related, but most of us use VS Code, and if you use VS Code, I think you should at least give this a try. It's of course related to AI, but this one really blew me away. So obviously I've been using Copilot for quite a while. The only reason I even downloaded this was it's built on top of VS Code. So has all of your extensions. It's just VS Code. What you just saw me show the code on is Cursor, but it is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. So don't use it on any code bases that are super sensitive, because it does analyze your entire code base, and then it can help you write things like tests. It can help you write Dart doc comments. All of these comments you see, I did not take the time to write those. I highlighted this function and hit Command K and then said add Dart doc comments to this. And it's honestly writes better comments than I do. Beyond that, you can even reference files. So let's go into more of a Flutter file here, lib, just to kind of show this off. Domain, or actually presentation, pages, copy list. I want to do a qubit, for example. So you can go to tests, create this test file, and you can reference files. So hitting Command K, it pulls up this code generation, and I could basically say at coffee list qubit.
You're missing an E.
Autocomplete anyway. I can basically say write Flutter tests for 100% code coverage of this file. Use mocktail to mock any necessary dependencies. Go ahead and hit enter here. And it will, right in front of your eyes, just go ahead and start writing this out for you. So the reason I'm sharing this is not because it's perfect and because you should just trust it blindly or anything like that. The reason I'm sharing this is because it's better than I thought it was. And I think it's worth going and checking out. So you can see here, it does a pretty good job at writing some tests. And because it analyzes your entire code base, it understands kind of what the functionality is here. So while Copilot was kind of like autocomplete on steroids, this is closer to ChatGPT in your code editor. So once it's done, you can either accept or reject it, give it follow-up instructions. For this example, just accept it, and then it's
Have you switched over to this now from Copilot?
I have Copilot running in here as well as this. So all it is basically what I just showed you, the Command K action. But you could also, highlight a file and you can hit Command L and it'll pull up a chat dialog right there in your browser, and you can be like, explain this piece of code to me, or ask it questions based on referencing code.
What is it called again?
It's called Cursor. So their website is cursor.sh. I think it's only for Mac right now. I think most of us are on Macs if you're doing any iOS.
Only VS Code?
Only VS Code right now.
Randall referenced another AI, something similar to Cursor, Codium.
Yeah, we were writing tests, I think.
Codium.
That's all. Tests.
So I think he said this one may work for not just VS Code. So it might be interesting to look for. One other thing about the Cursor, if you have GPT-4 API access, you don't have to pay for it. You can just give it your own API key, which is really nice.
Oh.
It will run you up a bill though. So don't go home and just like start generating a whole project because it will ramp your usage up pretty quickly.
Has anyone used SourceGraph's Cody?
What is it?
SourceGraph? They have a tool called Cody.
I've not heard about this one.
Their thing is sort of code intelligence, right? Particularly like indexing multiple code bases and relating them if they, and really like code intelligence was their thing. But then they built Cody, and their focus they've been talking about is really like accessing other services APIs and not having to worry about like schema and things like that, because they've already interrogated it and can help you build, the objects. And
that is really interesting, because normally where this code generation will go wrong is just like ChatGPT, you have the hallucinations. So you'll say, write me a piece of code that does this, and then it'll import a library that doesn't exist, never has existed, and use it superbly confidently that it's there, and then the whole piece of code is useless because the library doesn't.
Yeah, and they're a significant part of their focus is indexing or, embodying your code in it. And I think their focus has been kind of this, we see a lot of, let's use the same language in both places, which at times means that you're gaining some language knowledge, but maybe not, some of the language features, right? And so for them, it's like wherever these boundaries are, we can write whatever's necessary across that boundary from app to app or service to service using
Interesting.
AI.
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, if you guys find any new tools that you're loving like this, please bring them to the meetup and share them, because this stuff comes out so fast, it's impossible to keep up with them all. And I'd love to hear what kind of tools like this y'all are using to optimize your workflow, because that's the only way we'll all collectively stay ahead of it. But awesome. If nobody has anything else, next time we're going to be talking about adding Crashlytics to your app. We did move this next meetup up a week, so it is the first Thursday of November. So don't come the second Thursday. We won't be here, and you'll be super disappointed. Awesome. Randall, thank you for tuning in. Thank you anyone else that